Good afternoon and welcome to tutorial 6. I am Mugelo Hlongwane. In this tutorial, we will be looking at ideology and ideological state apparatuses. So we talked about the group presentations. So with this reading, I know people usually feel uncomfortable. And I know Althusser really makes us uncomfortable sometimes. But what we are trying to do in this module is to tell you the truth. Of course, not necessarily our truth, but what is the truth according to Althusser. You are going to feel like that man, that we're making you uncomfortable. And sometimes the issues just get hot to such an extent that people want to leave the room. But we don't want you to feel uncomfortable and leave the room. What we are trying to do is to make you view teaching, and in this case, just view a society in a different lens than you could view it before you started this course. So we're just giving you a theoretical lens to think carefully about the things that are happening in society. And what's most important is that that society is also made up of schools, the places where we as teachers teach. So Louis Althusser says ideology has very little to do with consciousness. It is profoundly unconscious. You will see as we continue what this means, but I hope you understand the quote. If you don't, you're going to see as we continue where the issues of consciousness come in. So I gave you this as a way of succeeding in this module. So I hope you read the reading and it was cool. 52 pages is quite a lot, and but you are now used to this. You've been reading readings for the past 6 weeks, so I think you've got this now. You have to do it. So I always try to make you see the interconnectedness of the themes. And we started with R.S. Peters, where we talked about the concept of an educational process and just the concept of what education actually is. And then upon completion of that reading, there were many things that remained hanging. And part of that was that education is a difficult concept to define. So what makes education difficult to define are the different aims that people think education should have, and also the different conceptions of different people on education. And that's where we then looked at Matebula and Divala. And then we looked at how then the content is selected. We looked at school culture, which we had termed to be the curriculum. We were using the work of Stenhouse. We then tried to look for the relationship between education and capitalism, where we looked at Marxism. So now it is crucially important for you to understand Marxism before plunging into Althusser, because Althusser was a Marxist, and all his theory, that this entire reading draws upon the theoretical heritages of Karl Marx. So it's really important that you get to understand that. So in Althusser's work, we are looking at the relationship between education and ideology. Of course, ideology is a very broad thing. So this is a very broad topic, as you will see here. So what we want you to do is that at the end of this, we then want you to think about how ideology actually functions in schools and in just all educational spaces. Because when you write your essays or in your semester tests and exams on Althusser, we would really want you to bring it into sharp focus of into what happens in schools. So your tutorial questions were the following. What is an ideology? What, according to Althusser, are the state apparatuses? Give examples. What is meant by the reproduction of the forces of production? What is the relationship between Althusser's ideological and repressive state apparatuses? Provide examples from your own life experience of how each of these state apparatuses have functioned in your life. So the man is Louis Althusser that we are going to use his ideas. So yeah, when you read, you might find out that this guy actually killed his wife. I asked you in the tutorial, does that make him a bad person? Of course, that is subjective, and I don't want to delve on that. What's important is that his ideas are critical in this module. So just before we start with Althusser, I think it's important to recap on how a society is structured, and we covered that in Marxism. So this is called the topological structure of society. So a society has got two main structures. We have what is called the superstructure and the infrastructure, which we also called the base. If you want more clarity on these two, you have to watch my video on Marxism, where I explain in much more deeper detail. But what is important is that we are going to look at the things that are in the superstructure: education, family, religion, politics, the mass media. We are going to look at how these things actually maintain and legitimize things in the base or the infrastructure of society. How do these things in the superstructure actually reproduce the relations of exploitation and all those things? So we talked about ideology, and I told the root word here is ideas. So we're looking at how ideas actually influence the way people view life, the way people view the world. So these are certain beliefs and philosophies that are attributed to individuals, groups, or cultures. So these ideas, these beliefs influence how people perceive the world and how people do things. So these ideologies can be related to political systems, to social values, or cultural norms. So what is it that Althusser tells us about ideology? He says ideology has no history. I told you, it is not a product of historical development. We cannot say that ideology started then. It has always been there. And as much as ideologies can change with space and time, however, the function of ideology remains the same. So it is a representation of the imaginary relationship of individuals to their real conditions of existence. And the main function of ideology, irrespective of time and space, is to interpellate. That's a word that Althusser uses to say that ideology hails individuals as subjects. Okay, we talked about recognition and misrecognition of certain things. So what so what happens here is that ideology, by hailing, he said it's like actually when, as I told you, like when you walk down the corridor and someone calls your name, sometimes unconsciously you just turn around to see who's calling you, because that's that he says in the same manner, that's how ideology can work. Sometimes we don't even think about following certain ideologies. We do these things unconsciously. He says we are always ready subjects. We are subjects that are always ready to follow certain ideologies or to be fed with certain ideologies. So we talked about the ideological state apparatuses. So these are the state apparatuses that use ideology. I'm still going to talk about these. However, the important thing is that we looked at these things, as you can see in the pictures, the churches, the media, family, the law, the unions, teacher unions in this case, the politics, and all those things. And what I highlighted was that these things are the agencies of the ideological state apparatuses. So I want you to look at ideological state apparatuses as an umbrella with all these agencies under it. Okay. These things, schools, culture, the schools are actually agencies of the ideological state apparatuses. Not really call a school an apparatus. I prefer calling these agencies. So we also looked at political ideology, and you can see the different political parties that I've presented on the slide. So the important thing, what I wanted to highlight here, was that they function through ideology. They are agencies of the ideological state apparatus, and it doesn't matter whether you vote for the ANC, the IFP, the EFF, the DA, Umkhonto weSizwe, and all those other political parties. At the end of the day, the function of ideology will remain the same, irrespective of what you vote for. The function of ideology is to keep things as they are, to maintain the current status quo. So it doesn't matter what you vote for. The function of ideology remains the same. Look at me now repeating this. So it will always be like that. And these things are they are contributing to class inequalities, which are things that happen in a capitalist society. So all these things, the ideology, the political ideology that is used there, is just to promote the needs of the capitalists. Then we looked at the ideological state apparatuses. We looked at things such as churches, the things that we've covered in the previous slide. These are the agencies. Then we looked at this picture and I asked you, what do you think is happening there? When you look there at this picture, this is a newborn baby. On the first day when this baby was born, on his first day on earth, he was given a name. That's also how ideology works. Ideology gives us identities sometimes. So this baby was given a name, whatever name you can think of. Let's say maybe his name is, I don't know, I can't think of a name. But with this slide, I was just trying to tell you that by always ready subjects, this is what Althusser meant. Sometimes you don't even choose to be given that identity, okay? But as you grow, of course, you get to choose. But the important point is that ideology can actually construct our identities. It can even change sometimes our current identities into other identities. Okay, this was taken from that source. Never mind the part that's written in another language. Let's look at this English part. When a child is born, he receives advice from his mother, teaches him how to speak, and even knows the most profanities and insults. This is still the way ideology works. Your mother also using ideology to sort of like give you a certain identity that insults are not good, and you see these things that are written here. Then we talked about ideology and religion. This was a very hot issue in the tutorial, and it made people uncomfortable to such an extent that some of you even asked me if I go to church. But the important thing is whether you go to church or you don't, these ideas, this theory remains as it is, and you don't need to be a believer or to not be a believer for you to understand Althusser's ideas. The important thing is that we are all here as teachers, and this theory is central to us as teachers because we need to be cognizant of the ideologies that exist in educational spaces. So I asked you if you can see ideology here. I won't read this now. You can just pause the video and read what is happening there between God and Jacob. But the important thing is that Jacob's identity was changed here. So this is how sometimes religion and our churches, in this case, can make us conform to certain subjects, okay? And God is the superior subject, and you are the subject that has to conform to that superior subject. Okay, I even talked about the typology that is used also in this. As you will see in your reading, there's that subject with a capital S and there's that subject with a small s, and we talked about what those things mean, but it just means that the other subject is conforming to the subject with the capital S. Then we said we need to be able to differentiate between what is called the repressive state apparatus and the ideological state apparatus. However, the important thing that we're trying to dissect in this module is actually the ideological state apparatus. But for us to understand, I think it's quite better to compare the two. It's better. So the repressive state apparatuses belong to the public domain. So these function by violence. Whole, unity, we talked about that. That's where the police force and army belong. The ideological state apparatuses belong to the private domain. They function by ideology, and usually there's multiple and you have a choice to choose. The important thing, though, is that there is no state apparatus that is purely repressive or purely ideological. So it's not the case that the repressive state apparatus does not use ideology at all. And it doesn't mean that the ideological state apparatus does not use repression at all. However, what makes a state apparatus to be an ideological state apparatus is that between repression and ideology, it functions dominantly by ideology. The same applies to the repressive state apparatus. At the end of the day, both the repressive and ideological state apparatus aim to foster discipline, and you know that like in this module now, you should be seeing that discipline is just something that is needed for the capitalist society. So these ideological state apparatuses are sites of class struggle. Still on ideology, we talked about these things. I'm not going to talk about them now in the video, but these were just examples. So remember the clicks and Malema thing, that there was clicks posting it on Twitter. We talked about, there, as you can see those people. And we talked about these as ideologies in the tutorial, and we had some really interesting contributions on this. So, and then you can also read through this slide as well. You can pause the video because these are things in Marxism. So if you cannot recall these, you have to watch the video on Karl Marx. We talked about these pictures, and again, I won't delve into these, but what was important was that when ideology fails sometimes, then repression kicks in. And then we talked about these pictures, about where you've seen them and what was happening there. So there's always that thing that says educated people don't act like that. And you've probably heard it somewhere. And it usually happens when educated people have to protest against certain things which are part of the capitalist system. And education, in a way, conditions people that they should not act like that because the education itself is subservient to the needs of the capitalist society. It is making learners who are docile and will be submissive to the needs of the bourgeoisie. We talked a lot about that in Marxism as well. So you can reflect what you have learned in the tutorial. So this was just a picture to show you how actually ideology works. It's not always the case that you do it, that you accept it consciously. And it's not like the teacher says, take this ideology, and then you just accept it and say, thank you so much for the ideology. Say, we talked about this picture in the tutorial. You can read through the speech bubbles. So in closure, I would like to close with this. I'm a teacher at heart, and this is what satisfies me as a teacher. When a student says, oh, I see it now, to me, that is the actuality of teaching, and it stands at the foundation of much of my teaching philosophy, which is to turn souls from the world of becoming into that of being. So here I asked you to rate the tutorial.